Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason, thank you for engineering the broadcast. Class, we're not going to be taking calls today. We have Ricky Rocket with us. And Ricky Rocket, welcome, Ricky.
Good morning, Vincent.
Good morning, Rick. And
I'm running at half mast. It's been a long summer.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what.
It's still the air quality here is as bad as it was, last month. We're still in the middle of fires.
Well, from what I understand, this is a record-breaking fire amount of fires. The real estate, the acreage, record-breaking, and a lot of it could have been prevented. Taking matches away from people would be one good start. We've got with us J.C. Cole. And class, J.C. Cole has a degree in civil engineering and geology. And he's been involved in real estate development. And he went to Latvia in the early 90s after the Soviet Union collapsed. He was there for almost 20 years. And he was instrumental in real estate investing and forming and leading an American Chamber of Commerce in Latvia. And it became the most influential business organization in the country. J.C. Cole has experienced bank failures, 5 of them, 3 currency changes, 2 economic collapses. And so he's been there. And he's also been involved in identifying the fraud of the Western banking system and its inevitable collapse. And so he returned to the United States. He has a farm on the East Coast in the Garden State. And believe it or not, there is fabulous soil in the Garden State. Not all of it's been paved over. The northern part of the state is, northeastern part of the state is pretty well paved over. But there are parts in the southern part of the state that are really, really fabulous. And you can still grow and farm in the southern part of the Garden State. So I want to welcome J.C. Cole. Welcome, J.C.
And hello, Rick. Nice to hear from you again.
Yeah. So I met J.C. Cole at an expo. He came over to one of our expos in Missouri, and it was great to meet him. He's a friend of Dr. Richard Alan Miller's. And we're going to be talking about lifeboats. Now, to me, a lifeboat is what you jump into when things are really, really bad. But you've got to have it ready for that time. So, for example, when the Titanic set sail and 4 days later it sank, there'd be no survivors, none, if there weren't lifeboats. Now, of course, there weren't enough lifeboats, so not everybody survived. But that's just one small example. So a lifeboat is something that you have ready, in my world, for when it might be needed. And it kind of seems to me like they're needed now. JC, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree totally with you. What our analogy is that small sustainable farms are the lifeboats for the United States.
I can make a comment also. I wanted to say, as an introduction, that J.C. Cole came into my life just about the same time that Matt Stein did. And Matt and I regarded J.C. as our handler in the sense that he was more knowledgeable in certain aspects or elements of events that were about to occur than either Matt or I were. And over the next few years, we had daily correspondence. And I grew, knowledge-wise, in that arena way beyond anything that I would have ever done on my own. And so from that point of view, JC's insights on what happened to the Soviet Union, in my humble opinion, are relevant to what is now about to happen in America. They're quite different, and yet they're basically the same event where the food system fails. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to bring JC on with me, because it fits precisely in your purpose and orientation of USA being prepared. And that was one of the reasons I wanted JC to participate, because his take on things is different than mine. And he's educating me, and is the one that talked about a sustainable lifeboat, which is basically a lifeboat with oars. And when I say that, it's one thing to have a bomb shelter. It's another that the bomb shelter has got some kind of infrastructure to it so that it can mobilize itself in an event that there's a need to make changes. Nobody knows what's really going to happen. We have a lot of fear of this or that, and the pandemic came in as a sideball that everybody should have expected, because that's what, PBS, others did when they did their videos on a pandemic. It was an interesting one that PBS did, and yet nobody took notice, everybody being afeared of Fukushima or some of the other kinds of events that might occur that would break down a culture. And here we are. And look at what's happened. And how much of it is real?
JC?
That's one of the things I wanted to say as an introduction to JC, and why I have become close friends with him, because I trust his insights.
JC, when you talk about sustainable lifeboats, and you mentioned farming, could you share with us what you mean, specifically what you mean, and how we can use a lifeboat, how we can build one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. What I experienced in Eastern Europe was the collapse of the Soviet supply chain, and then I scratched my head and I said, well, why is it that 300 million people all of a sudden lost their supply chain, but it's still peaceful? There isn't riots. And it really came down to a couple of issues, and one of them was that the for the Soviet people, they never had a fear of famine, because 90% of these people had what's known as a dacha, and we would know it more as a victory garden from like World War II. So they had supply of a good amount of their needed food for the year in their control. And they're almost always within 5 to 10 miles from their location. And that the Soviet system of the co-host farms, which I don't recommend, but had the farms within 30 or 40 miles of the center of population. So when I came back and I looked at the United States, our biggest issue is that the average unit of food in America travels 1,500 miles. And then we import 50% of our food. And of the 50% we don't import, that we grow ourselves, 80% of that is grown west of the Mississippi, where you are, Vincent. And something like 90% of our vegetables that we grow are in California. So all of a sudden I realized that our food security is based on two things. One is food production, and two is food accessibility. And our accessibility to food is based on a just-in-time delivery system. And of course, I had witnessed the delivery system in the Soviet Union collapse. So I reverse engineered it and said, what could cause the collapse? And then this leads into Matt's great book, When Technology Fails. So when we identify different, let's say, issues that could collapse our shipping system, we come up with about 13. There might be a few more. And so the only solution is to have a certain amount of food. I go by the 80-20 rule. I think that's a pretty good, accurate rule. 20% of our food needs to be grown within 30 miles of regional population centers. And to do that, you have to design a small farm. And so that came to the lifeboat for our system, especially us on the East Coast, is small farms. Well, sustainable small farms that can be able to withstand if we got some of these events, such as if a financial collapse happened, but the farm keeps on moving, keeps on going, or a delivery system collapses. They have the resources already stored to get through a year. Or if, the big one, the EMP happens and electricity goes off, the farm's already designed for running off grid. And so that's what I'd say is it's a sustainable farm, and we nicknamed it a sustainable lifeboat.
Well, you're talking about, J.C., believe it or not, you're talking about our farm as a sustainable farm. We have solar panels, we have generation, we have fuel. We can't support everybody, but we could,
exactly.
We could keep the farm running, and we could keep raising the animals, and we could, provide meat. We have a Black Angus cattle farm. That's what we do. So literally we grow grass, and then the cows eat the grass, and the highest and best value that we have in our farm is the Black Angus grass-fed beef. That's ultimately what our product is. And sustainable, we are somewhat sustainable, but even though we work as hard as we can to be free from the system, the supply chain, if you will, we still need lubricants. We still need diesel fuel. We still need hydraulic hoses and seals and belts and pulleys and bearings, and we still need the rest of it. So we are not completely immune. And if a capacitor blows on our solar inverter or solar charge controller, if we have a spare, that's great. If we have two spares, that's better. But if we don't have any spares, we're kind of cooked. So even though we have strived for a couple decades now as first generation farmers to be independent, it is extremely complex and is extremely difficult. But we did take that first step, and we have been working on improving it every day. So to me, that you need to take that first step. Now, when, I used to have a job, kind of like a lot of people, go to work and thought I did something important. But actually what I did really didn't amount to a hill of beans. Now, what I do, and our family does amount to a hill of beans. It actually amounts to a whole bunch of cows. So, from my perspective, what you're saying is exactly right. And we are really precariously perched in the United States because of our food insecurity. We'll be right back. Dr. Richard Alan Miller's with us. J.C. Cole's with us. And we're talking about food security. We're talking about the term sustainable lifeboats. And, J.C., you mentioned Victory Gardens. And class, let me just mention a little bit about Victory Gardens. I know a little bit about them. My grandparents had them. And pretty much a lot of people had them. People who lived in the cities or the suburbs had these Victory Gardens. And the idea was to plant enough food to kind of help get you through the year. I'm talking about tomatoes and peppers and lettuce and even grapevines and chickens, raising chickens in the backyard. So people fenced in their backyards, and they turned in their lawn into a garden. And there are about 18 million of these during World War II to feed the Americans. 18 million. And there was even one on the White House lawn. So the Victory Gardens are really important. So really what that meant was bring food local. How local? Right outside your back door. J.C.?
Yes. That's the last concept that we've had on it. So, as you had mentioned, you are designing a sustainable farm, and you also pointed out how it's not quite there yet, but it also took you decades. We don't have that time to get that amount of farmers. So instead, we design a prototype model that can come in and be put in place in less than a year that creates a sustainable farm. And it's kind of like a franchise model, but it's owned by the farmer. There aren't any franchising fees or anything like that. It's just the design of a prototype. And as an example, if you look at what McDonald's has done, not their food quality, but their ability to duplicate the exact same results with untrained people. So once you get all the approvals to build a McDonald's, it takes about 45 days to actually construct the whole restaurant to turnkey. So we don't do this in farming, but we can. We can design a sustainable farm or a lifeboat. It's just like if we designed a certain type of lifeboat and put it into mass production. And that's what I believe we need to do. So like, let's say it would have, you'd have different models, but, based on how much land you're putting it on, but you could put in like 5,000 square feet of hydroponics. So you have 20, year-round, growing, and a few other things. So that design can be implemented very quickly. And along with the design comes, as you and I know, we had to go, to almost back to school just to figure out solar energy so we could put it in our own backyard. But instead, you have just a team comes in, already figured out all the loads you need, puts it in, and goes. So that's the basic concept.
I like to interject also. The key, in my humble opinion, begins with our children. And once a child understands that it can produce its own food with a garden, and that's what they're oriented toward, the sandbox, then it becomes the concepts of innovation. And a child doesn't know it can't do something, and so it creates a way that it happens. And we have lost that concept and our concepts of teaching children what's important. And for me, I remember a time when we had home economics, shop, mechanical drawing, and other kinds of skill sets that were being taught at the high school level that no longer exist. And I remember a time when I first came into the United States, I started in the middle of second grade, and second grade required Latin back when I was a kid. And they were teaching Latin to children in second grade. They no longer do this. And the concern I have is that I personally think our children are possibly our single most important natural resource. And that if you teach the children how to grow food, that everything else will fall into place. Everything.
Okay, we'll be right back with Dr. Richard Alan Miller and J.C. Cole. And the interesting thing is, Rick's on the left, J.C.'s on the right, and I'm in the middle of the country. Dr. Richard Alan Miller's with us on the West Coast, J.C. Cole on the East Coast, and I'm in the middle of the country. And J.C., you said something quite interesting. Actually, many things you said were interesting. Number one, you mentioned McDonald's, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I got this wrong, but you mentioned McDonald's is a cookie cutter recipe so that, once the prototype is figured out, they can bang out restaurants in 45 days. So they can, once they get the permit, 45 days later, they're flipping hamburgers. Second thing, you mentioned, I believe, 5,000 square feet of hydroponics. I wanted to clarify that to the class, what that means. So an acre is roughly 44,000 square feet. 5,000 square feet of hydroponics would be roughly 1 acre. That would be the size of a small city property. Okay, not in the center of a big city, but if you lived on in one of those little neighborhoods where you had 1/8 of an acre, that's about what we're talking about. And I wanted to mention one other thing. When you mentioned prototypes, J.C., when we built our solar system, it literally took us 18 months plus to build the first prototype. And what I'm talking about is design the solar rack, design the angle, pointing the solar panels at the sun for the best yield, the compromises that we had to put into it for snow and sleet and being beaten up by things falling from the sky like hail. And we had to orient it for, the winter versus the summer. And we had to put in underground cabling and find the materials and cut and weld and, the array and build all those things and design it for the load with the battery bank. So it was really complex, and it took 18 months plus to do that. And, is it good? Yeah, it's really good. But will it last forever? No. So there's a whole bunch of things to be thought about. And this prototyping idea is a wonderful concept. I really like it. Please continue.
Yeah, so let me just use the hydroponics as an example. And why 5,000 square feet is I talked with the president of a corporation that has a computer program that runs the hydroponics, and that's kind of the minimum amount of square feet they need for the hydroponics to run by computer, so that you're taking out the knowledge necessary of the farmer. He doesn't have to learn this. He just has to do what the computer says. Now, I'm not saying base everything on computers. I'm saying you have a manual override in case the computer, drops out. But by that time, the farmer's up to speed on what he has to do daily. So it maximizes the efficiency of the hydroponics. That's just one example.
I'd like to interject here. One point. Hydroponics is different than aquaponics, and aquaponics is different than dirt. And each one has advantages and disadvantages. And actually, the Victory Garden is essential in my understanding of models. However, if you're in deep space or you're on a situation on Earth where you have to have a closed system, and when I say a closed system, that means you can't negotiate with a neighbor because you're in a missile silo or something equivalent, then it becomes important to understand what a closed system means and what it does not mean in regard to inorganic salts and what a plant needs for bandwidth in light. And the new studies that are coming out now indicate that cauliflower, for example, requires a different bandwidth of light than broccoli. Now, as water goes from one system to another, it heats up. And there is a requirement that the temperature of the water is efficient for assimilation in different plants. And that's why you put the broccoli below, if it's a falling water system, like a missile silo in Arapahoe, that you would put your broccoli below the cauliflower because the water's heated up and a closed system. I first was introduced to these concepts in 1968 when I came out of graduate school and went to work for Boeing. Boeing had, before it had a thing called the Space Center down in Kent, it had Lunar Base Alpha 1, which was in South Park, and out in the south end of Seattle in the McMicken Heights district. And I worked under Art Pilgrim, learning how to grow with chicken running around, pooping through the grate and dropping into a fish system with tilapia and chlorella algae. It was a closed system that produced protein and your plants with chickens working manure. We discovered that all the inorganic salts needed for a plant to grow correctly were, for your NPK system, was basically 1/3 chicken manure, 1/3 rabbit manure, and 1/3 worm casings. And if you had all of those three systems in your family farm, you had all the inorganic salts necessary to run an aquaponic or hydroponic system that was over disadvantages of dirt being exposed to temperature and light. The light changing, of course, with seasons, and the temperature, again, with seasons. And what I wanted to do was build a simple, basic aquaponic system which did not use fish. It was a closed system without the fish and chlorella, so that children realized that they could take a tomato plant that they started in May and grow it all the way through December, producing tomatoes. And once that child saw that it could overcome temperature and light based on wherever they were, East Coast, Midwest, or the West Coast, then the garden took on a whole different kind of structure in the possibilities of how the two interface with each other, with your greenhouse and your outside garden. That's what I want. Yes, go ahead.
That's an excellent example of what we're talking about, that you get experts in the different fields needed. Because, Vincent, you and I are on a farm. We could never do what Rick just said unless we had somebody just come in and put in the system for us and say, do this every day. And so you do that, you break the farm down into its critical pieces, and then you find the masters in the critical pieces, like water use and water storage. There's a gentleman named Scott Hunt, who's one of the best I came across, that knows how to store and move water around the farm better than anybody I've met so far. And so you actually find all the different components needed, and you put it into one prototype, and then the team can come in and assemble it. Now, we can also get to the financing part of this because it gets expensive, but that's I think later discussion.
I found that building a simple aquaponic system for children cost me less than $200, just in parts with PVC pipe and these storage container units that we use for storage, boxes where you put holes in the bottom so the water can circulate through. I don't understand a lot of things and have had roadblocks with trying to move from one system to another. But what I'm doing today is moving my aquaponic system that was on a second floor next to my kitchen on a deck. I'm moving it downstairs into a small greenhouse with heat. I'm going to use one of these real, water heaters that you buy at Bi-Mart or someplace that's inexpensive. And then I'm going to use light besides the sun, LED lighting, which is really, really cheap because it doesn't heat up. And once the child sees that if it can supplement water and light temperature to keep the plant growing through various seasons, I feel that is going to take charge over a 20-80% thing that you were talking about, like the city of Chattanooga now does. Every single skyscraper in New Jersey now has a garden on the top of the skyscraper that feeds the cafeteria. And that's an all year round situation that's now being developed in New Jersey. I've seen that. And I sense that once we revision what a farm is and what a farm is not. Cattle ranching and so on. Basically, I first got introduced to cattle farming when I started studying noxious weeds. A noxious weed is a plant out of place. It's a plant that a cow won't eat. And all 50 states, their county extension put out a noxious weed book on what noxious weeds grow in that state, and basically every single one of them has pharmaceutical or edible, value to it. It's just that a cow won't eat it. And I think that there's going to be a need for change in what we consider the importance of protein and where it comes from in terms of cattle versus grain. I realize that there are different enzymes and so on that are different for each of us and blood types and so on, but I'm starting to understand that a lot of our problems is our eating habits.
J.C., I've got a question for you. You mentioned Scott Hunt's name. And, class, Scott Hunt, in the heyday of Doomsday Preppers, the National Geographic's entertainment production, Doomsday Preppers, was produced by Sharp, S-H-A-R-P, Entertainment out of New York City. That television series, Scott Hunt was the consultant, the preparedness consultant for Doomsday Preppers. And he wrote the test. He wrote the preparedness test. How well are you prepared? And it was complex and comprehensive. And I took the test. J.C., did you take that test?
I did not. But I know Scott personally. I met him a couple of years ago at a prepper camp.
Mm-hmm. He's a pretty bright guy.
He is. He has his master's of mechanical engineering, I think, from Rensselaer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a very respected RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And I believe that's in New York State. Very well-respected institution for engineering. Okay, so when we come back, the question I have for you, JC, is how important is the sustainable farm right now? How important is it for us right here in our class? How important is it? Rick's with us. JC's with us. JC, how important is the sustainable farm right now for those in our class?
It's basically the survival of our nation. This is a national security issue. And I can point it out very clearly in the last couple of months. Everybody's now aware that we have a space command and that we're trying to protect our satellites. And if our satellites go down, our GPS system goes down, and our GPS system controls basically the distribution of electricity and finance, and then everything stops. So literally, as soon as everything stops, you have about 2 weeks, the average American, before you run out of food. That's it. And so it's a national security issue. And this leads into another point. Vincent, you've done some incredible work. I was out at the farm and of trying to help the community. You do this show for free, trying to help build and strengthen our country. But it came down to it is not the farmer's responsibility to create food security for the United States of America any more than it, to pay for it, any more than it is, Lockheed's responsibility to pay for the jets and the missiles. It's the responsibility of the American people to pay for food security. Now we have to separate the difference between your individual cash flows as a business and who pays for food security, right? And that's where my opinion, and we can expand that to if we don't get this right, the human species may be in threat, because it's not just an American issue. It's an issue throughout the world. And And we're seeing it happen with the weather changes. We're seeing patterns. I think John Moore called out a long time ago that the Gulf Stream had stopped at a time, and so all weather patterns are changing, but humans react very slowly to the change. Well, if weather patterns are changing, that means our food growing dynamics are changing, and we're not responding. And one of the things with hydroponics is it kind of shelters us from weather. And especially some of the new hydroponics, you can put in hail-proof coverings so you can get through some of the hailstorms. But anyway, so I answered the question, in my opinion.
Rick, what are your thoughts on that question? How important?
So, a modular system, I'm working with a guy out of Indiana that has aquaponics. That's his name. And what it is, it's a modular system where you can stack them to each other so that it can do a single person, a group of small family, a larger family or a community, and then a city. And this aquaculture system that's modularized is very inexpensive. They're cheap. It has a pump that moves the water, and the plants grow in a soilless water situation with fertilizers. And the fertilizers are different for each plant. I've noted, I was trying to figure out why my tomatoes don't put out some years. And it's because they were planted in the wrong kind of a soil of NPK. And just taking those concepts into consideration of where you change the nutrient of what the plant is taking in, predicated in which stage its growing stage is in. You know, it has a rooting system, and then there's a leafing system where it starts growing leaf and flowers, and then it starts to fruit. And each one of those, the N, P, and K, are critical in ratios predicated on what stage that plant is in and where it's growing. And once you understand its relationship to those nutrient things and the light, of course, the light and temperature, like mushrooms, I put all my plants that were on the second floor, I've now put them in the ground, and especially the more winterized plants like carrots and potatoes, where they're going to grow through the winter. And I've noted that because I've started irrigating that part of the soil, all of a sudden my mushrooms are coming up. I have bleach up now, right now, and the critters all around me are leaving little trails of the mushroom that they're eating because it's something they didn't do. Julie has a friend, a little squirrel, that comes down for the bird food every day, and during the early part of summer, she didn't see it. Where's the squirrel? Well, he was over in the neighbor's yard eating fruit. And we have stages in our growing system.
When we come back, may we discuss, you're talking about hydroponics. Hydroponics is not a closed system. It's got to have some inputs like NPK, that'd be nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, water. And I don't know of a hydroponic system that does not work without movement of the water. So there has to be some kind of a pump, and that's most likely an electric pump, which needs to be fed with electricity. How can we make this as sustainable as possible? And can you build us a model that we can implement, within the next couple of weeks? We're talking with Ricky Rocket and J.C. Cole. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rick Miller's with us. Dr. Richard Alan Miller. He's in Oregon, the Beaver State. J.C. Cole's with us. He's in the Garden State. I'm in the Show Me State. And I wanted to mention that the quality and supply of almost everything that I try to buy has degraded. For example, if you bought Aldi, A-L-D-I, pasta, spaghetti, dry pasta, 7 years ago, and you stored it cool and dry, out of the light, it's probably still good. If you bought Aldi pasta, the same thing, except new and improved, probably by a new manufacturing company for Aldi, and you still have it within the best used by date, it probably has bugs in it. What I'm trying to say is you can't count on anything or anyone anymore, period. You can only count on yourself. And that's what this broadcast is about. This broadcast is about we have to take it back. We have to do it ourselves, or we might perish. So, J.C., the question that I have for you is there something that we can do within the next couple of weeks to get this prototype moving, this prototype of the sustainable lifeboat, the sustainable farm? Because it literally took me, since 1989 to, become, somewhat knowledgeable in farming and to be somewhat successful in farming. I'm not saying that I'm completely successful, and I have been a total abject failure in getting the sustainable lifeboat concept working in the way I tried to do it, which was I tried to buy 1 square mile, divided up into 2, 5, 10, 20 acre parcels, and provide that at $1,500 per acre to a bunch of people who would want to build a village and share their skills and work cooperatively with each other to be absolutely as sustainable as possible, electrically, with water, with food, with physical security, etc. Couldn't pull it off. Still can't. So even at $1,500, I couldn't pull it off. So what can we do in your mind with the prototype?
Well, we can do a lot, and let me just bring in that famous Edison line. We just figured out one more way it didn't work. So we keep at it.
Right.
So yes, this is what, when I went over to Eastern Europe, one of the things I was totally unprepared for was literally all business started from zero. There wasn't anything really working. And the concepts that we had in our business school did not apply because they all applied to an existing system. I literally had to start from zero on almost everything. So the answer comes down to a very simple thing. How do you get the prototype funded? That's it, right? That's the first part. So where do you get the money to fund the design of the prototype, where I can bring in like Scott Hunt, and I can bring in Alan Miller, and I can bring in like Joel Salatin, for all their expertise to design different factions of it. And someplace out there, there's definitely a genius in hydroponics, which would answer your question, what to do. How do you run hydroponics without electricity? Right? And there is a way, by the way. It has to do with gravity flow and a few other things. So once you get the prototype funded, one of our challenges is all of our business basically runs on rate of return on investment, the ROI. And that's the challenge we have with small farms. We'd have a lot more small farms if it was more profitable, right? So this is a finance issue. How do you finance small farms? Because I imagine a lot of people who are listening to this would love a small farm, but it doesn't make money. It's not competitive. So how do you change that paradigm? How do you change the dynamics to make it a profitable entity? And there are a couple of ways to do it. But that gets into a little bit of a lengthy decision. Eventually it comes down to, we have to get, if this is a national security issue, we have to get somebody in the government to change the dynamics. And we, by the way, we have a model of that. Most of us know that a very large amount of corn is used to create ethanol, which is, in my opinion, a terrible waste of both money and energy. But people are investing in it. So how is it that you have, billions of dollars invested in corn ethanol? These guys are making a profit. Where's the profit coming from? The profit is coming from tax legislation. In other words, the United States, citizens are subsidizing the entire corn ethanol industry. Well, if food is a national security issue, right, then if you create certain funding structures from the top to make small farms profitable, or to be able to put in sustainable lifeboats, that's the answer.
Okay, well, you mentioned the government, and I can tell you for a fact that I met with a guy in my truck driving. I was the guy behind the wheel, and I turned to this guy who was a former very high-ranking official in Missouri. And I turned to him and I said, what's with this ethanol? It makes absolutely no sense. It's kind of like taking more than a gallon of energy and creating a gallon of ethanol. It makes no sense. And he said, you don't understand the pressure. And I said, did you ever take a science class? And of course he didn't. And so I found out how it happened. Literally, it happened through bribes and threats. People were bribed at the government level, paid in order to pass this legislation and make it happen. And if they didn't accept the bribes, they were threatened. Pictures and exposure and that kind of thing. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, there's a metaphor in terms of farming in what I have decided to call storable and non-storable commodities. And a storable commodity is primarily what our Midwest is now based on, growing, potatoes and corn and soybean and so on. These are commodities that can store for trade. Non-storable commodities have to be produced each year. And if you overproduce them, a lot of times a given state will set up a market order to prevent the overproduction of something so that the market remains stable. This is where Hamburg took over and tried to take over the world trade by working with surpluses and shortages. And if you can produce, and a typical example might be peppermint leaf. How much peppermint do we use in toothpaste? How much do we use in herbal teas and other flavonoids to flavor things with peppermint? And if you overproduce that leaf that year, then the markets drop, and that's where German trade would take over the markets by selling them at shortages and surpluses, where the prices would soar or drop below production costs. And to have storable and non-storable commodities, I felt that the small farm should always focus on the non-storable commodities. Agribusiness was oriented more toward the concept of storable commodities like corn and soybean, and that the small farm could use barter, where each region, and the United States, in my opinion, was broken into 8 different regions, have a series of crops that are what we call Me Too crops. That means that crop comes from the Midwest, and that crop comes from the East Coast, like golden seal. And with that said, there were chemical analogs on the West Coast that were similar to golden seal, which we don't grow here. What we grow is Oregon grapefruit. Has more berberine than hydrasine in it. But once you had identified your natural resources for a given region, you then had a barter system available that you could trade to a different region like the Midwest. The Midwest has things that are used in surgery like mandrake. Mandrake, for example, mandragorine is a surgical drug that does not grow anywhere else in the United States except in the Midwest. And other kinds of things like that, where you have pharmacy, your herbal pharmacy. And where all your products came from natural resources. Now, I don't know how to manage this other than to say that whenever I need extra money, I just go in the woods and gather some moss. That's what I have here. And I can sell that simply and have a supplemental source of income because of the natural resources that my current neighborhood provides. And everything in the woods is marketable. Everything. From pine cones.
So here's a comment. So J.C. Cole, I believe you're absolutely correct. Now, while you didn't say it exactly the way I'm going to say it, I believe I understood what you might have meant. So a young person, such as our son, who's in his late 20s. Now, he's a degreed farmer. That means he has gone to the university and he's studied agriculture. And he actually has a sheepskin that says he is a degreed farmer. Okay? So a young person such as our son cannot, in my opinion, build and operate a financially viable farm. He can't afford to buy the land, the tractors, the implements, the fertilizer, the electricity, pay the taxes, comply with the government regulations, buy the tires, the fuels, etc., the seed. He would not be able to pull that off financially. Now, for food stability, food security, he would need to have some kind of financial assistance from the people who want to eat.
Well, there's sharecropping. That's an old term that was used. Sharecropping means that you have the combine, and I have some crops that need to use your combine.
Yeah, but what I said,
to own the combine to sharecrop with you.
Yes, but what I said, Rick, was a young person can't pull it off. A young person can't pull it off. Let's come right back to that. Let's come back to that. We're going to a break. Dr. Richard Alan Miller's with us, and J.C. Cole. So Rick mentioned sharecropping. Now, that's working together. Now, the problem I see with sharecropping, I don't want you to think I'm throwing a wet blanket on this, but the problem with sharecropping is that you are almost completely dependent on others outside your family. The guy with that machine that you need, the combine, the tractor. Yeah.
Like when I used to have a small 20-acre field of wheat, of alfalfa, and my neighbor would come over and he'd cut it for 30% of my crop.
Yeah. Well, I understand that, and I'm sure our class gets that. The problem with that is that you are almost completely dependent on people outside your family and their carelessness, their lack of knowledge.
Well, slow down.
Rick, let me finish, please. Can I finish, please? And then comment. So their carelessness.
Supposing that it's an agribusiness that's cutting wheat, and you're growing psyllium, and the psyllium does not need to be cut during the period of wheat cutting, which means he's got these huge, big $90,000 combines that are sitting idle, not being used, that could be producing income, cutting psyllium off season from the wheat. And that was the relationship that I saw between agribusiness and the small farm, basically not being able to afford the elevator or the truck to take the crop to the elevator, but they were growing as a marketing cooperative, let's say, sea buckthorn. Oh, that's what they do up in Canada. And what they're doing is they use a combine off-season that isn't cutting grain at that time to do sea buckthorn. And, it's a relationship in the community that's based on habitat. And each habitat is different, and the players are different. And some are going to work with you, and some are going to be, a-holes. I don't know. What we have to do is relationship of our crop to what's going on in the neighborhood. And that Vancouver, British Columbia is pulling this off now wonderfully with Punjabi Indians that came in to feed Vancouver, BC, which, by the way, is 4 times larger than Seattle. It's huge. And yet all their food is being produced there locally now by Punjabi hand labor, basically through what we call farmers market. And Chattanooga is another metaphor that we set up similar, where Chattanooga's logo is right here, right now. They produce right now today 20% of the food consumed in that city. Downtown Chattanooga is an old family farm that's turned into what we call a farmer's market every day, and they have a stock exchange of surplus foods each week that are used by agribusiness then for canning and producing other crops, where they're buying these ingredients or surpluses for use in formulas and making things up. It's a complex system that can be run on a single farm basis on into a small community. And it's basically the small community that I'm seeing now is going to be the way America goes, where there's a more decentralization of our food production.
Rick, I'm at ground zero of this particular issue, and sharecropping is working together. And as I was trying to mention before, the problem with that is you're almost completely dependent on people outside your family. Their carelessness, their lack of knowledge, and their lack of meeting the commitments to you can sink your farm. And let me give you an example. So I know some farmers who have grass, and they need to have their hay cut, and they are unable to do the job themselves. It takes 3 of us to cut the hay on our farm. So what we do is we cut other people's hay, and we cut theirs first. We cut it, rake it, bale it first, and then we go to ours because we feel there's an obligation. But there's another neighbor who we don't cut his hay, and he is still waiting for the guy who promised to cut his hay. And this happens every year, year after year after year. So he's dependent as a sharecropper, and he can't get the hay cut because the guy is not dependable who cuts the hay. So the bottom line is it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to be a sharecropper.
You're the one being the dependable person.
In the good old days, there was a gentleman here, a farmer, and I was outside with him. Our son was there, and we were helping him with his truck. He had some problems. So we were repairing his truck. I was helping our son, who was doing the mechanic work. And this farmer said to our son, I need to borrow your dad's truck, and I'll be back in a little while. My son immediately turned to him and said, we don't lend out any of our equipment. Period. And the farmer friend was absolutely shocked when he heard that. And our son said, we don't lend tools, we don't lend tractors, we don't lend implements, we don't lend trucks, we don't lend cars, we don't lend out any of our equipment. However, I'll be glad to take you where you need to go. Now, the reason he said that is we have never found anyone who takes care of our equipment as well as we do. It always comes back dinged, dented, bashed, broken, okay, if it comes back. So we don't lend it out. So this cooperative thing is really it's not like we haven't tried. We've tried since 1989 to make this kind of a thing work. It's extremely difficult because not everybody has the same level of education, concern, care, training, and interest, and desire, and stick-to-itiveness. So we have all different levels. And it doesn't really work as well as we would like it to work. We would love it to work, but it doesn't. J.C. Cole.
My dad has a saying. He taught me this. He said, I don't loan out my wife, my rifle, or my blah, 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 because I paid for all the miles on them.
Well, okay, so we're in the same camp.
And my dad, he had certain things that he just didn't loan because he paid for their full use. One was his wife, One was his rifle, and the other, they had so many miles on them before they wore out, and he didn't loan those out.
If I may make a suggestion, one of the things here is, yes, the cooperative is a long-term solution, but we are in a food emergency. We don't have the time. And the issue with cooperative is, one of the big issues is it cannot be quickly duplicated. You might be able to get a few local places to work together like the Amish, but our paradigm is driven by finance. So the solution in today's world, until our paradigm changes, has to be financially balanced.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, let me make a quick comment about the Amish. Just an observation. We have a tire shop here at the farm, and we repair flat tires, and we change tires, and we balance tires. And if it weren't for the Amish, probably 99% of the flat tires that people get would go away. Why? Because the Amish don't get flat tires. Why? Because the Amish don't have pneumatic tires. They have solid rubber tires on their wagon wheels. They don't get flats. So they don't really care about throwing those horseshoe nails down on the road. They don't care about nails in their properties where the Englishmen, as they call them, go to pick them up and take them wherever they're going. They cause a lot of flats. I mean, that's just anecdotal. So I'm not trying to beat the Amish up. I'm just telling you that they're all kinds of careless people.
Well, there's no perfect. We're not on a perfect planet. So one of the things, though, by the way, we have a horse farm, and so we have to drag with a magnet because a nail in a horse's hoof is extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And so literally anytime I'm working on wood with screws and nails, I have a magnet there that I have to drag to make sure I didn't drop anything. But that's a side issue. Let's get back to how do we solve this problem? And the problem's a financial problem. I mean, getting back to Vincent's son, we have trapped our youth in a debt crisis, and we have to solve it. It's across the board. How can you expect a young man with the skills to go into farming at the cost of what it costs, at the costs they presently are? And not only that, but you're looking for your farmer to be both a financier, a marketer, a farmer, a mechanic.
Yeah.
I mean, we're losing these skills, right? So what's a model that we can do that we can quickly change the paradigm on food production, locally controlled, and that it really comes down to what can we do to remove ourselves from the vulnerability of a supply chain break. That's it. And the only solution I've come up with is to create micro markets, and that's small, sustainable farms.
Right.
So,
right.
Right. And we know that our electricity can be turned off at any time. And at that point, I think the place to just look at is New York City and Long Island. Because when electricity gets turned off, you have 16 million people that have no supply. You have a panic area right there. Right, and they're on islands, which is even more interesting. There's limited ways off those islands. So how do we solve that problem? And it really comes down to designing a couple of different models that are all quick to put up, and how do we finance it? And the financing really goes back to New York City and Washington, D.C. How do we do that? Yeah.
I just saw an article where they're going to build some floodgates on the Holland Tunnel. Did you see that article yesterday It's interesting.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, they're going to build floodgates for the Holland Tunnel because they're expecting it to flood.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, I believe, is that there's seven bridges to get in and out of New York, and there's millions of people, and if they all say, I think it's time to get off, it can't be done. It cannot be done.
No.
Correct.
Right.
And if let's see, I think it's 400 million tons of cargo comes into New York per year, and 90% by trucks. Right? So there's a great article out there when the trucks stop running, all of the things that happen. So New York probably has about a week of food before.
Yeah, and EMP will stop a lot of the trucks cold because of their electronics. And imagine what would happen with an EMP spike on trucking.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for just a second. Let's just divert for 1 second.
A quick thing.
So,
okay, you go. You're first second.
Okay. So it doesn't even have to be a truck that succumbs to an EMP. If just one out of, let's say, 50 cars succumbs, just one out of 50, doesn't even have to be any trucks. That car is in the road, and that car stops wherever that car was. So now you've got a traffic jam that's going to be days if one out of every 50 cars just stops. So it doesn't have to be the trucks. It can be as simple as a fan belt, a water pump.
Do they poop from someone's toilet when an EMP happens on New York?
Well, that's why you want to be on the top floor.
Yeah.
That's why you want to be on the top floor.
It's crazy, and people aren't ready for this yet. They haven't thought it out.
Right. So it's as simple as this. You can start with a 5-gallon bucket, and you can get that for 99 cents if you go to the bakery department of the Chinese factory outlet and say, hey, can you all save me some of those buckets? Get some of those buckets. They'll charge you 99 cents because that's the minimum price that anything goes out the door out of used bucket department at Walmart. And you can fill it with dirt, and you can get some seeds, and you can start experimenting right now. Put that darn thing in the window and start growing. That's what you can do. Tomatoes, peppers, etc. right now. Now, that is the beginning of your victory garden. J.C.?
Yeah, so what I do is I write an article I used to write every week, but I got too long. And so every month or so, called American Gray Swans. And basically I just identified the at least 13 ways our shipping system will collapse. And some of them are guaranteed to happen. For instance, an EMP from the sun. It's guaranteed to happen. We just don't know when, right? But we're totally unprotected for it. So when you see all of the vulnerabilities to our just-in-time delivery system, there's only one solution. Remove ourselves from it for a period of time that we can sustain ourselves until we rebuild, if any of these events happen. And that's the only way to do that is to have food production that has the ability to go off the grid and last for a year near your population centers. And by the way, you can put modified farms into a lot of these buildings, like these shopping malls that are going bankrupt. You can turn those into hydroponic oases.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And right now our problem is that we're almost addicted to electricity, and we haven't thought it out. I think the sewage, local, city sewage is one of the examples. All sewage systems in the old days were built on gravity flow, and then all of a sudden they hit let's say an elevation where they put in a pumping station. Well, now we have a problem. If you lose the electricity, the pumps stop and you get the sewage to back up. So anyway, we're addicted to electricity, and it's just a matter of money on how to build redundancy around that. And we get back to financing. How do we finance food security in our country? And in order to do that, we have to have somebody at the government recognize it as a national security issue.
Right.
And
that's going to be tough.
And for me, I always felt that if you taught your children, the 6-year-old, the 5-year-old, how to garden right out of the gate as part of their basic first steps in education, that the whole thing would be solved in one generation.
Well, I think there's bigger things behind this. You know, for instance, if you look at what Henry Kissinger had said, basically, if you control oil, you control nations. If you control food, you control the people. So, you know, why is it that 10 corporations control 90% of our processed food?
There it is.
You know, when we saw this COVID-19 issue, right? It wasn't the farmers who stopped growing, right? It was the funnel points in the supply chain of production. You know, it was the Tyson Foods that shut down. So why do we?
We'll be right back. So I've got about 5 or 6 minutes left of today's broadcast, and I wanted to mention that tomorrow, hour number 1, Kathy, our domestic engineer, is going to be teaching us how to save money and things we need to do right away. Hour number 2 will be tips from my unfinished, unpublished, unavailable for sale, unorganized book on things that I think you should do immediately. J.C. Cole, today's broadcast, if you were to sum up the takeaway, what would the takeaway be for today's broadcast?
That we've identified we have a critical issue in our food production and our food delivery system, and that it's just it's a ticking time bomb. And when it breaks, we're going to have chaos. And we can fix this, but it takes the government to help us with this.
And Grace Thorne said that if Vincent were to put another show together, just using J.C. Cole, myself, and maybe 1 or 2 others, that people would flock wanting to know how to start their own food production. If you did something like that, like you did before, only focused on not weapons, but how to grow food, I think that would be something that everybody, when you did that show with kids asking questions, that should have been immediately turned into a book. You're like a leak planter. What you're doing is really important. Really important.
Well, yeah, but I feel like I'm a pretty significant failure. Because I'll tell you
you're
why.
not. You're just a grumpy old man. That's all. Getting locked down.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about the grumpy part, but the rest of it's probably true.
I don't know, Vinny.
Rick, I'm up for that challenge. I'm up for that challenge that you just put out there worldwide, and I'd like to modify it in just one simple way. And make it really easy and very affordable. Let's do it on the radio, okay? Let's do it on the radio. Now, I know it's a little harder to do show and tell because Vinny doesn't want to do video. So if we can describe it with words, without pictures, and assign homework, I am up for that, and I'd like to do that on the air. I would like to teach how to survive, how to grow food. And if you're up for it and JC's up for it, I'm up for it, and we'll put it on the calendar and I will announce it. Is that something that you gentlemen?
He's my handler.
Is it? Well, no, I'm up for it. I'm up for it, and we can do it every Thursday if you'd like. I mean, if you'd like to do that, I'm up for it. What would you like to do, gentlemen? Rick, you go first.
Well, I like working with JC. He's knowledgeable in areas like finance that I am not. He is aware of things I am not aware of and has helped guide me toward my own ends to the point where I'm now, in my humble way, semi-self-sufficient. Power, that's my bicycle over my pump.
Mm-hmm. So are you up for it? Is that a yes?
Bicycle and pull it out of the ground that way.
Is that a yes, no, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. No, I'm up for it. I think it would be a very cool thing and could lead to a series of books for children.
Okay. JC, are you up for this?
I'm game.
So So we have agreed right now, as far as I can tell, that we have agreed starting next Thursday that we are going to do a broadcast about farming and how to successfully pull it off to become the master of your own lifeboat, at least right now. Is that right?
Well, at least have a start point so that you have goals and direction.
Okay. The only thing that I would like to have is some bullet points so that we can stay on track. So you all have my Rick, JC, have my email address. Yep. If you'll just send me what you'd like to talk about. Nothing fancy, just a few words to keep us on track. We're up for 2 hours from now on until we decide, or you guys decide that, you don't want to do it anymore. We're going to teach farming, how to do it, how to get started right now. And I would like to add that I would like this to be without needing $1 million. Okay, so
that's right. Yeah.
And that's going to be a requirement because people are tapped out. Now, it would be great if we could have the government write a grant and say to the government, okay, we need $5 million and we will show you how to do it. We will take 4 square miles and we will bring in people with talents and we will be the prototype and we will develop the books on how to do this. We could do that. Donald Trump, President Trump, we will do it. If you will give us the money, $5 million doesn't sound like a lot compared to, bailing out Boeing and the airlines and everybody else you're giving money to. $5 million, we'll take 4 square miles and we'll make it happen. How about that? Maybe just 1 square mile. But we will teach the country how to become food sufficient, self-sufficient. That's a challenge for the government. So if you're listening and you're one of those government types, you can contact me, instructor at USA Prepares, and we'll see if we can start a dialogue and make it happen for we the people. Dr. Richard Alan Miller, thank you so much for being here for today's broadcast and for advancing the class on farming. J.C. Cole, thank you for joining us and sharing your wealth of knowledge and advancing the self-sufficient farm. I'm looking forward to Thursday's broadcast, 2 hours at a time from now on, teaching farming. Gentlemen, thank you so much.